You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 4th of June 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead,
an Israeli proposal has been given to Hamas. It was done on Thursday night, our time. We're waiting for an official response from Hamas. We would note that publicly, Hamas officials came out and welcomed this proposal.
As both sides consider the deal, we'll have analysis of the latest Middle East ceasefire proposal. Then there's a new Chinese spying scandal. We'll examine why Beijing is going public with the espionage allegations. We'll have feedback from IATA's AGM in Dubai and ask why the Swiss Air Force is practising landings on motorways. We'll rustle through the papers, get a roundup of architecture news, and then, what's the perfect portrait?
You not only get geography, but you also get history in the face. I think Coco Chanel said, after the age of 40, we get the face we deserve. So that plays a role.
The artist Tai Shan Schierenberg sits down to tell us about his work ahead of his latest exhibition. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. The Israeli military said another 4 Israeli hostages abducted by Hamas on October the 7th have died in captivity, and their bodies are being held by the Palestinian Islamist group. Counting began in India's election today with a big win projected for the Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol says the country will step up cooperation with African nations to secure a stable supply of critical minerals and speed up negotiations to promote economic partnerships and trade. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, on Friday, the US President Joe Biden unveiled an Israeli Gaza peace proposal, one that apparently was initiated by Israel, but appeared to come as a surprise to many within Benjamin Netanyahu's government. So what is this plan, and does it have a better chance of success than previous proposals? Well, joining me now from Jerusalem is Nimrod Goren, who's a senior fellow for Israeli affairs at the Middle East Institute and the founder of the Israeli foreign policy think tank Mitvim. Nimrod, many thanks for joining us. I wonder if you would take us back to last Wednesday when Israel's war cabinet made an offer for a ceasefire to Hamas against the wishes of Netanyahu. What happened next?
Good morning. Yes, these are times when things are changing and there's a lot of speculations and unknowns still there. So whatever account we are discussing about what happened, we need to take it with a grain of salt. There are many things happening behind a diplomatic curtain that we are not aware of. Basically speaking, the Israeli war cabinet was for quite some time pushing Netanyahu to be more flexible in terms of agreeing to proposal that can bring back the Israeli hostages, which is a real priority for the Israeli society. Only yesterday we heard that 4 more of those abducted are not alive anymore. There is a sense of urgency on doing that. Netanyahu was very cautious over the time and took into account the opposition of his far-right coalition members, the ministers Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who are not in the war cabinet but are important for the survival of his political career and of his coalition. What happened last week that reportedly he is agreeing now toward a formula that is more moderate than what he agreed to in the past, that is closer to what Hamas demanded or agreed to a month ago, but in which there is still quite some space for ambiguity in which each side can define some clauses in that proposal as it finds fit. President Biden took this initiative and ousted it over the weekend at a time when the religious parties in Israel are not capable of responding because of Shabbat, observance of the Israeli Saturday. And that sparked a whole debate. Is Netanyahu serious? What does the ambiguity mean? Is Hamas on board? Americans are stepping up their pressure within the international space to get it moving. There is an opportunity. It's after 5 months of failed negotiations, and hopefully that will lead to somewhere good, but there's not enough clarity on whether the two sides are really ready to make such a deal.
What do we know about what the proposal entails?
So the proposal is basically in line with the previous mechanism that was set. It's a three-phase deal that begins with a pause in fighting for 6 weeks, in which Israeli hostages will be returned under the humanitarian categories. So whether there are children still there, or the women, or elderly, that would allow a total ceasefire for that time. There will be a withdrawal of the Israeli military from the key dense populated areas. There will be more humanitarian flow. But the big challenge is what happens when this first phase, on which the sides could agree, that's kind of the zone of possible agreement between Israel and Hamas, agreeing on a temporary pause in fighting. But Hamas wants to be sure that that leads to an end of war, while Netanyahu is not willing to commit to such a thing. So when phase one ends, the proposal spells out a process in which talks towards the next phase will continue, during which the ceasefire will hold. And that's one of the points of contention, because each side is defining that differently. And eventually that second phase will lead to a third phase in which there will be Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, there will be reconstruction. It's not clear, according to the plan that Biden spelled out, who will actually be governing Gaza when the war ends. That's something that the U.S. administration is trying to avoid, spelling out here, and on which Israel has very clear statements that it will not agree to Hamas continuing control over the Gaza Strip.
Tell us about the ructions this has caused within the Israeli cabinet.
So in Israel, there are currently two cabinets, basically. There is the regular cabinet, which includes the traditional right-wing coalition members, including those on the far right who oppose this deal. And there is the war cabinet that also includes a centrist party that joined because of the war to help handle this emergency situation, in which there are former IDF, Israeli military chief of staff, who are generally opposed to Netanyahu, but join his coalition out of a sense of national responsibility. Benny Gantz, Gadi Eisenkot, they are more moderate. They are now threatening to leave the government if Netanyahu doesn't change course and move things to a better direction, as they see it. So the far-right ministers are opposing this deal. They actually haven't even seen it. Netanyahu did not present them the deal. So what President Biden got as an Israeli offer, not all ministers within the Israeli cabinet actually saw it. So that's one of the criticisms, that Netanyahu is supposedly afraid to even share with them the details. They already went on record stating that they will leave the coalition if Netanyahu moves ahead. So it's all could be seen within a political context in which Israel is now at a 2 months, very intense Knesset parliamentary session, during which the question is whether early elections will be called or not.
So, I mean, acceptance of this plan really comes down to parliamentary arithmetic.
Well, the split between left and right is becoming more complicated because, while the Israeli public is shifting to the right, many among the right do not want to see Netanyahu as prime minister anymore. There's now more than 70% that want early elections, that want new leadership, and many of those want a new leadership that is from the Israeli right, not from the far right. So within the right-wing sentiment, there are many who support anything that could be done to bring the hostages back home. And that's kind of complicated the calculation. And therefore, eventually, I think whatever Netanyahu decides will be based on his political motivation, whether he wants this coalition to stick or whether he's planning a move to go for early elections at a time where he controls the process, he defines the timing. If he wants to go there, you will see him more open to accept such a deal. But as currently we have been hearing, it's now a waiting period towards a Hamas statement regarding whether they accept the deal that was forwarded to them or not. So currently, Israel is in sort of a waiting period in which there is a lot of internal debates, but no decision to be made until we hear from Hamas what is their reaction to that deal. And maybe Netanyahu hopes that they eventually will be the ones blocking it and not him.
Because, of course, from both sides, this will determine the political future and their grip on power. And for Hamas, possibly even their physical survival as well as their political survival.
Yeah, which could be two different things, because in a way, what I think Israel is concerned about is making sure that Hamas will no longer pose a military threat or a terror threat to Israel from Gaza, and that it will not govern Gaza in the day after the war. If we are talking about survival of Hamas leader, of Hamas as an organization, there are modalities that can be in line with that. So there were talks in the past about an exile of Hamas leaders out of Gaza, or the continuation of Hamas as an organization that doesn't have ruling capacity. But overall, when you define the next day of Palestinian politics and leadership in Gaza, which I think should be under the auspices of the Palestinian Authority, coming from Ramallah in a renewed fashion to govern Gaza later on, enabling a unified leadership that could negotiate with Israel on two-state solution, but that's a long way ahead. Eventually, that's not something that will be discussed with Hamas now. So it's natural that the future governance of Gaza will not be part of the Israel-Hamas deal, because Israel, and I think the US as well, doesn't want to see Hamas as the one that eventually will be negotiating who will actually run Gaza the day after.
Whose deal really is it? I mean, Biden was very careful to frame the announcement as an Israeli initiative, but as you say, it did appear to be a surprise to some members of the Israeli government.
I think the surprise was the way that Biden presented it, and that was a way to bind Netanyahu to it, because there's a lot of criticism about Netanyahu saying one thing and then acting in another way, and the Americans wanted to make him committed to whatever he delivered. So the way that was answered, I think that was a surprise, because, within the Israeli debate the days before, it was clear that there is a new proposal. The anticipation was that a negotiation team will go to Cairo or go to Doha and present it and discuss it. It wasn't seen like any big drama is approaching. And then President Biden's move definitely showed that the Americans are now really pushing hard to get it forward, and they are doing it by calling Arab leaders and engaging them and helping them push Hamas. There were multilateral statements supporting of the American initiative by the G7. There is now talk about a UN Security Council resolution that the Americans are advancing, calling on Hamas to accept the deal. So now the Americans, after binding Netanyahu to whatever he put in the table, are now moving to put pressure on Hamas, with the hope that once Hamas, if it responds favorably, Netanyahu will still be on board to the same plan that he himself initiated. And within all that context, we're hearing about a possible invitation, or an invitation actually, to Netanyahu to speak to Congress, which is quite surprising for those many Israelis that do not want to see Netanyahu continue, how he's now embraced by both parties in American politics. And for that to happen, I hope the Americans will condition it on an Israeli agreement to whatever deal President Biden is trying to advance.
Nimrod, thank you very much indeed. That's Nimrod Goren there. And this is The Globalist. $14.12 in Beijing, $7.12 here in London. Well, espionage allegations between China and Western countries have long been a feature of politics, but it is rare for Beijing to flag up an incident of spying, as the MSS, China's Ministry of State Security, has just done, over the arrest of a Chinese married couple whom they accuse of working for MI6, Britain's foreign intelligence unit. Well, I'm joined now by Robin Brandt, who's the BBC's former China correspondent. Many thanks for coming into the studio, Robin. I wonder if you could tell us what is known so far about the Chinese married couple and what the accusations are against them.
Well, look, very little. We know their names. He is Wang, she is Zhou. There are some details that emerged in this social media posting over the last 24 hours, and it goes way back to 2015. So 9 years. And crucially, that was an era known as the Golden Era in terms of relationships between the UK government and China. And so it seems even more odd that these accusations should be levelled at a time when, as far as the British government was concerned, it wanted to escalate and improve its relationship with China. Of course, that era is now long gone. We're told that this couple, initially he came to the UK working for a state-owned entity, possibly an agency of the Chinese government. There were, as far as the Chinese are concerned, incentives. There were kind of plied with financial incentives and encouraged to return to China and gather information about whatever area in which it was that he was an expert. His wife then came to the UK as well, and they essentially were recruited as a couple here in the UK and then returned to China to go about their work. I mean, this is an era which is a relatively long time ago now, almost a decade. It's odd that the Chinese authorities would come forth with this now, but as you said just previously, that the context is of increasingly fraught and tense relationships between the UK and between China, and more importantly, accusations levelled at several people here in terms of those who work in Parliament and also some working in Hong Kong, that they have been working alongside the Hong Kong intelligence agencies and the Chinese intelligence agencies. So what we have, which is not uncommon in terms of relationships between China and other countries, is kind of tit-for-tat allegations.
And I mean, it's not an isolated incident. I wonder if you could touch on a few of the the other recent high-profile espionage allegations?
Well, there is a relatively long list. So at the moment here in the UK, as I said, there are allegations and proceedings against several people alleging that they have been working for the Hong Kong intelligence agencies and also assisting the Chinese agencies. But the case of the two Michaels, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, both Canadians who were actually detained in China for a very lengthy period of time. That was during my time reporting in Shanghai. And that came at the height of very tense relationships between Canada and between Beijing. And it's not uncommon for China to make a move, so to speak, and target individuals as a weapon, as a tool in its diplomatic relationships. We've seen dual Chinese nationals as well, working in China for CGTN, which is an arm of the Chinese state broadcaster, also Bloomberg, the global news organization, who have been targeted and faced allegations of spying or faced allegations of working for foreign governments. And that has yet again been seen as well as an expression of China's anger in its broader fraught diplomatic relationships with various countries.
Is the timing of China going so public with this significant?
I think it's very odd because we're going back to events that are said to have begun in 2015. And as I said, the context for that as well. I mean, look, countries are always spying on each other, or certainly countries that see each other as adversaries. But 2015 was the beginning of the golden era. So if these allegations are true, that in itself would be quite extraordinary as well. I think the most important thing here is to look at the criminal allegations, the investigations we're seeing here in the UK, levelled at people who worked in Parliament over the last couple of years, and also others who are facing allegations about working alongside the Hong Kong intelligence agencies. And I think it's in light of those accusations, those moves by agencies here in the UK and prosecutors here, that it seems that the Chinese are simply reacting to in a tit-for-tat way. That's a classic reaction from the Chinese authorities. You do to us, we will do to you.
It is also, though, the 35th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre.
Yeah, so I mean June 4th, which is today, 6/4, as it's known in China, is an event that the country as a whole, in terms of its government, refuses to remember, refuses to commemorate, and you could see it in the context of that. I mean, what often happens is that as we build up to this day on mainland China, you find that various entities, commercial entities, or others within society begin to slightly kind of shut down. And what they're looking to avoid is any potential risk of any potential humiliation, as they see it, of people trying to use their website or use their platforms to remember the massacre in Tiananmen Square on June 4th, 1989. Now, I mean, this could be related to that. There is hugely heightened sensitivity around this event, but I think it's much more likely to be about the worsening relationship between the UK government and between Beijing and those allegations levelled at others of, in terms of the UK authorities, of working for the Chinese intelligence agencies.
Is there a big movement within China and Hong Kong to mark the anniversary of Tiananmen, even though obviously it's not allowed?
Hong Kong used to be the place where there were very visible commemorations on an annual basis, and it was a focal point for remembering those events, the weeks and months before them, and of course the events on the 3rd and the 4th of June 1989, when hundreds of people who had been part of an overwhelmingly peaceful protest were massacred by China's People's Liberation Army. Those events in Hong Kong don't happen anymore. They ended in 2019 when the protests in Hong Kong came to a head, and new legislation has been enacted there, and those protests no longer happen. What we have is an event and a commemoration of it that has been exported to other countries in the world, and yet in mainland China there is no official commemoration, and there are an increasing attempt over the years of a revisionism which even leaves many people to question whether the event actually happened itself. When I remember speaking to some young Chinese people in my time in China, and it wasn't that they were disputing that Tiananmen Square happened. They didn't even know. They weren't even aware of these events. So in terms of mainland China, there's no official commemoration. There is hugely heightened sensitivity around the days leading up to it, and of course June 3rd and what's known as 6/4, June the 4th as well. But this is an event and a memorialisation of it that has been exported, no longer in Hong Kong, but in Taiwan, New York, other parts of Europe as well. And those are the places where there will be commemorations, large-scale, visible moments to remember the events and the people that died. But on the mainland, and not even now in Hong Kong, any kind of events permitted. And the authorities, they target dissidents, they target even those in exile in the days and weeks before to ensure that they won't use this moment to try and remember those events, because it's an event that China at the time, its authorities saw as being very necessary, but it's an event that it even now refuses to remember and sometimes even refuses to acknowledge.
Robin, thank you very much indeed. That's Robin Brandt there, and this is The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio with me, Georgina Godwin, and we'll continue with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio is the freelance journalist Terry Ramsey. Terry, I promised our listeners that we would have minimal Farage today, but I think we do have to mention the man because he is front page news everywhere here in the UK right now. Tell us why this is.
Yes, he is. And it's because yesterday he announced that, despite having said that he wouldn't be taking part in the general election, he has announced that he, in fact, will be standing as a candidate for the Reform Party, and he's taken over the leadership of the Reform Party. As the Financial Times reports it, twin blow to Tories as Farage enters the fray, and polls predict a drubbing, because the latest poll, which was carried out before the Farage announcement, was that the Conservatives were going to really suffer at the polls.
For our non-British listeners, Farage, of course, is far right. He was one of the people driving Brexit.
That's right, and he takes a lot of credit for Brexit. He's written a piece in today's Telegraph in which he basically says that he delivered Brexit and that he delivered the huge majority that Boris Johnson had as a Tory PM, and that basically he handed that majority to Johnson and Johnson bungled it, is his claim. The Guardian talks about Tory alarm as Farage takes control of Reform UK. There's quite an interesting sort of side issue in this. You may wonder how he can suddenly just take control. The Times leader reports that actually that's because he owns Reform. I mean, literally owns it. It's owned by Farage Media Limited and a company called Thorn in the Side Limited, which I thought might be a bit of a joke by the Times, but I actually checked it on Company's House this morning, and yes, there it is, and it's run by one Nigel Paul Farage.
Which is extraordinary. So, I mean, but what this is very, very bad news for the Tories.
It is. It is bad news for the Tories because he's expected to take a lot of votes from them and possibly splitting that right-wing vote and allowing Labour to come in a lot of constituencies where they might not necessarily have had a chance before. Although Farage will point out that that in 2015 election, when he was the head of UKIP, which was the Brexit party, that they actually stole more votes from Labour than Conservatives. That's his claim, though his claims have to be treated with a large dose of salt. The Guardian has done, interestingly, a check on some of the claims he made in yesterday's speech. The 5 major facts, of which they found that 4 weren't correct and 1 was arguably incorrect or correct. So, I mean, that's not a great record. And I think he's taken the lead from his mentor, possibly idol, Donald Trump in the US, where Farage has worked with Trump in the US, and he's obviously learning some of the election tricks.
Well, of course, Farage did say that one of the reasons he wasn't going to contest this election was that he was concentrating on the US election and helping Trump. So there's clearly been a major change of mind there. Not just elections, obviously, here in the UK, in India, the results are just beginning to come out. Also, of course, the US, but Mexico, which has delivered the result here of Claudia Sheinbaum. She's the first woman president. Tell us more about that.
Well, she's quite an amazing character, really. I mean, she's a Nobel Prize winner. She has an engineering PhD, and she's also an accomplished ballet dancer, where none of which can be said about Nigel Farage, or indeed any of the other candidates in the UK election. So, I mean, she's quite a formidable figure. And she's won a landslide win, which is quite something. But she's been backed by Obrador, who is the outgoing president of Mexico, and people are saying that although she is in his wake and he has mentored her through this, that she's going to have to make a huge break from what he's done, because he's, according to some critics, had a bit of a charmed life, even though he's very popular and he's leaving office with a 60% approval rating, which is pretty remarkable. But that his economic miracle and also some of the things that have gone on under his rule cannot be allowed to carry on, like the rise of gangs and so on, where he's been seen to have turned something of a blind eye to them, and that she will have quite a lot of work on her hands to do.
And I mean, there are concerns that this is very rapidly moving towards a one-party state, given the Morena party victory here. Yes, and a lot remains to be seen about whether she can make it all her own, because there is a worry that, yes, there will just be more of the same and it will just follow party lines. But she's already pledged to launch a specialist prosecutor's office to deal with the epidemic of femicides, according to the Telegraph. There are up to 10 a day, according to the UN, and that she wants to clamp down on domestic abuse, which is apparently quite rampant in Mexico. And of course, a key difference with Obrador's administration will be energy policy, because that's her USP. She has environment-friendly credentials through her profession. And of course, that's something we're needing more and more of, as we know. One of the things that climate change is contributing to is the rise of melanomas, or skin cancer, in people in countries where before that was never a problem. Now, as a white African, I am afflicted by this stigmata. It's always the mark, the leathery skin of the pale-skinned African. But now there's a melanoma jab. Indeed, yes, and it's quite startling news from Chicago, where the results of a UK trial have been revealed, and it's claimed that this new vaccine can cut the death risk by half, which is quite something. I mean, it's early days so far, but the science behind this is really quite intriguing and quite technical. It's more mRNA jabs, which we first came across with COVID, of course. But apparently with this one, the scientists or the surgeons remove somebody's melanoma, or a little bit of it, and they then use that to teach the jab to recognise those particular individual cancer cells for that person, and then the jab is put into them, and the vaccine can go through the body and seek out those particular cells and eliminate them, which is quite a remarkable scientific achievement. Absolutely, particularly because at the moment, really, it's about kind of sloughing off the bits on top, rather like an insect, or metamorphosis, if you like. Seamless segue into Kafka. I see what you did there. So he, of course, died on, I think it was yesterday, wasn't it, 100 years ago? It was indeed yesterday, 100 years ago. He was only 40. That was 1924. Yes. Tell us why Kafka is suddenly all over TikTok. Well, the New York Times reports that Franz Kafka is trending and turning heads, and it says the writer's acute self-scrutiny has fans swooning online 100 years after his death. There's one particular
TikToker Margarita Muka, who's based in Athens, and she's a big Kafka head, as they call themselves, and she's really boosted his credence online, and he's become something of a bit of a pop idol. And to Muka, she says that the appeal was obvious when she read Metamorphosis. She said, "I felt like that bug." And now a lot of people, young people who have digital sort of isolation, are saying that Kafka actually got it in Metamorphosis, and he actually is a precursor of the sort of dislocation that young people now feel.
I mean, it's an extraordinary piece of work. Gabriel Garcia Marquez said that it showed him that it was possible to write in a different way. I mean, it really is extraordinary. There's an auction, actually, which I find really interesting. Sotheby's is going to offer a rare letter by Kafka, and it's all about his acute case of writer's block. It sort of gives a date going, didn't write anything today. The next day, didn't write anything today. We'll have no time to write tomorrow.
Yes.
It's just a lovely letter. Anyway, that is going to appear at auction as part of Sotheby's Books and Manuscripts sale that opens for bidding on the 27th of June.
Ah, right.
Terry, thank you very much indeed. That was Terry Ramsey. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. The Israeli military says another 4 Israeli hostages abducted by Hamas on October the 7th have died in captivity, and their bodies are being held by the Palestinian Islamist group. Of the more than 250 people abducted that day, about 120 remain in Gaza, according to Israeli tallies. Many have been declared dead by Israeli authorities. Following 6 weeks of voting across the country, counting began in India's election today. Exit polls project a big win for the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, whose right-wing alliance is set for a safe majority. And South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol says the country will step up cooperation with African nations to secure a stable supply of critical minerals and speed up negotiations to promote economic partnerships and trade. Hosting a first-ever summit with the leaders of 48 African countries, Yoon said South Korea will increase development aid for Africa to $10 billion over the next 6 years, as it looks to tap the continent's rich mineral resources and potential as a vast export market. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. 7:32 here in London. The International Air Transport Association, or IATA, annual general meeting wraps up in Dubai today. 1,500 representatives from IATA's member airlines, industry associate partners, international and regional associations, as well as leading manufacturers and industry suppliers, have all gathered to discuss emerging industry issues. Well, joining me now is John Grant, who's a senior data analyst at Official Airline Guide. That's an air travel intelligence reference that provides data on airline schedules, cargo and aviation analytics. John, many thanks for coming on the show. There are many, many issues to discuss. So let's begin with the problems surrounding Boeing.
Yeah, sure. Hi, good morning. The Boeing issue clearly is not going to go away. And the repercussions are impacting every part of the airline industry. Airlines are still uncertain as to when they can expect deliveries of aircraft that have been ordered. And some airlines, Ryanair, for example, have been particularly vociferous about having to defer new routes, cancel flights that they had planned for the summer. But that has all been arranged. Everyone is operating schedules that they know they have aircraft for, but the brand damage, reputational damage to Boeing continues, and there is some doubt as to when this will all clear. Certainly, the backlog is not going to be cleared before the end of 2025, maybe 2026 now. The US Federal Aviation Authority are limiting the number of aircraft that can be produced each month as they literally crawl all over them to make sure that they are airworthy and that they meet the specifications required.
I mean, is lack of expertise, lack of expert technical staff, a problem? And would that be affecting other companies too?
It is. And the big issue here, of course, is that we've moved very much away from older generation aircraft to new technology, and avionics engineers are in short supply. So around the world, we have this almost like perfect storm where we have aircraft that airlines want to bring back into operation post the pandemic that need to be taken through heavy maintenance checks, at the same time as we have aircraft that have been flying that are coming up for C checks, their heavy maintenance checks. And we have a lot of people and expertise that have left the industry during the pandemic and found better jobs. You know, a lot of maintenance work is done overnight in hangars, sometimes in very cold locations, and lifestyle changes that we're seeing everywhere are impacting the airline industry as much as anyone else.
Now, I imagine that sustainability has been at the centre of discussions. I wonder if you could tell us that, and also how environmental issues are affecting regulating bodies, particularly in Europe.
Yes, so we have, there seems to be a misnomer that the airline industry is doing very little about sustainability and the environment, when in fact it's hard to find an industry that has made so much change and so much improvement in its credentials over the last 20 years. Now, the IATA General Assembly has in recent years set some very ambitious targets that it hoped to achieve by 2035. However, it's very clear now that the biggest of those and the one that gets the most attention is about sustainable aviation fuel, SAF, which is a hybrid of existing oil fuel supply and other products that are put into the mix. Now, there is nowhere near enough production facility around the world to meet the objectives that have been set. And anyone who's rational about this would understand that whilst you may be able to produce and have a supply of SAF in London, New York, Los Angeles, and other major cities in the world, getting access to this stuff, this material in places in Africa and other more obscure places that rely on aviation for their economic links is virtually impossible. And the aviation industry really is struggling because governments and regulators are not providing the necessary incentives to the oil companies to refine and produce SAF. And it's not the airline industry's responsibility to become oil refiners. So there's this like Mexican standoff at the moment where the airline industry is saying there is not going to be enough of this material because it's new technology, it's going to be expensive to produce. The governments are providing no breaks and tax concessions for anyone to develop this. And so it's not going to happen. It's very simple. So we have the issue with sustainability there, but then we have some really, quite frankly, crass regulators in Europe who are now beginning to impose noise restrictions and sustainability and environmental restrictions on airline operations. We're seeing it in Amsterdam, where the Dutch government are imposing noise curfews, in Brussels and in Paris. Now, we understand all of these issues as an industry, and we're very sympathetic to them. But this is an industry that places, and this goes back to Boeing, deliveries for aircraft to be made in 10 years' time. And so for regulators to say, hang on, from next week, we want you to change your rules and how you operate, to hugely capital intensive businesses is just ludicrous. There is no joined up thinking, and the industry is screaming out to governments in Europe particularly to understand the value that air service and aviation generally, because cargo is an important part of this, provides to economic activity in its broadest sense.
John, thank you very much indeed. That's John Grant there. This is Monocle Radio. It's 8:39 in Zurich, 7:39 here in London, and tomorrow a major motorway in Switzerland will close for 36 hours. But this is not related to any problem to do with the vehicles that normally make use of the route. It's to enable the Swiss Air Force to practice takeoff and landing on the road as part of the Alpha 1 exercise. Well, Bruno Kaufmann, who is global democracy correspondent for the Swiss Broadcasting Company, joins us now from Reykjavik. Bruno, many thanks for coming on the show once again. The history of this goes back to the 1950s. What's the background?
Yes, good morning, Georgina. Yes, indeed. Where that's basically a take away from the Second World War about the air jets, the air fighters' capability to land and to take off in times of crisis. And when the Swiss motorway system was built, several parts were prepared for this kind of exercise, that the motorways were built to be landing airfields in times of crisis. And there were many exercises during the 70s and 80s. And then after the end of the Cold War, this was not done anymore. So this is the first time since 33 years that such an exercise will be done.
So, and why? Why did the Swiss authorities feel the need to repeat it now?
It's, of course, part of the change of the mood in Switzerland as a reaction to the war in the Ukraine and the geopolitics, and also to show the people of Switzerland that there are capabilities which are otherwise not discussed and seen so much, because today Switzerland has only 3 military airfields, and that's, of course, in times of crisis, really something like a weak point. So this exercise should show that the motorway system is still prepared to be, in times of crisis, a place where air jets could start and land.
So can you tell us how it will work practically?
In practice, this will start tonight at 9 o'clock. This motorway, which is really an important motorway on the east-west connection in Switzerland, will be cordoned off, and special troops will take away the guardrails. They will prepare within a few hours to make this an airfield. And from tomorrow morning, then at 9 o'clock, FA-8 Hornet jets will start and land. It's planned that 8 such air jets are involved. And in fact, it's not possible to go there and see that, but the Swiss broadcast company will live broadcast from the place. So this is also a public, you can say, event to show the Swiss, but also the world, that Switzerland still have a capable air force.
Is this a big story in Switzerland?
I would say it's a big story when it was announced, because it was really something like a Zeitenwende, a times change in handling this. Because I remember very well when I was a kid, I had all these air jets flying around in small, tiny Switzerland. You could hear them every day. And in the last years, this hasn't happened. The air jets had to exercise abroad, for instance, in the north of Sweden or in Sardinia. And now they are back to show the Swiss public that Switzerland has an air force, and it's a capable one.
Bruno, thank you very much indeed. That's Bruno Kaufmann, and this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
It's time now to talk design and architecture with Tim Abrams, who's contributing editor at Architectural Record. He joins us on the line now. Tim, you lucky thing, you're just back from Lisbon and the Gulbenkian. Tell us more.
I was there, absolutely fantastic museum to be at the moment. The Centro d'Arte Moderna component of the Gulbenkian has just expanded beautifully out into its garden. Previously, the Gulbenkian has been this slightly boxed in but beautiful kind of secret garden in Lisbon. But what's happened is they've just bought a new bit of garden off of a retiring aristocrat who's let them have the north of it, and they've expanded out into this part of Lisbon, and a new beautiful extension to the museum has been created by the Japanese architect Kengo Kuma.
And tell us more about that part of it.
Yes, Kuma has created, given to Lisbon, something that's called an engawa. I learnt this term. It's a Japanese term for a shaded veranda. And what he's done is create this swooping, beautiful roof form, which leads the building out into this wonderful new garden, which has been laid out for people from Lisbon to come and enjoy, and then entice people into this new art museum, the Centro de, well, not a new art museum, but a new revitalized art museum, the Centro de Arte Moderna. And it's a beautiful structure. It's incredibly, one would think that suddenly dropping a Japanese piece of, looks very Japanese. It's got the Portuguese ceramic tiles on the cover, on the roof, of course, but it still feels and looks very Japanese. But this park has been used to having strange and exotic things dropped into it. The building adjacent to it is actually a former stable block from the 18th century, modelled under an English baronial castle. So it's a very strange and exotic area to which this engawa has just been added, and creates this new, beautiful, flowing, but very exotic and strange feeling. Go to the Gulbenkian, get yourself. Everyone in the whole world's going there. I've never been to a city which seems to be so revitalized by tourism. I know there's a lot of issues with that, and a lot of people in Lisbon are kind of having problems with it, but it's full of Americans. I think that was partly because Taylor Swift was starting her tour there, but it's an amazing moment to be in Lisbon. Actually, I came back full of interest and hope. It was great.
How wonderful. The Serpentine Pavilion in London opens tomorrow. Now, just we don't have a lot of time, but I want to know about this series, because it started back in 2000 with Zaha Hadid.
Yeah, a 21st century phenomenon. It's architecture as art, really. It's the Serpentine Gallery is an art gallery. They give over the apron in front of the gallery to a structure, and every year, apart from the one we missed during lockdown, they have built a new structure. The rule is that it's by an architect who's not built in Britain before. So Zaha Hadid started it off. We've had Oscar Niemeyer. We've had OMA. We've had all these different peoples. Last year was a French Lebanese architect. This year it's the South Korean Min-suk Choi, and everyone builds a temporary structure. What happens then? It's a fantastic little event. It's a lovely place to go for coffee during the day. There's parties at the weekend, in the evening. But what happens often is that these buildings are sold off and they move off around the world. There's some in the south of France. There's some in Kuala Lumpur. So you have it's buildings as artworks. That's what it is. And it's fantastic to go and check the temper of the times to see the ideas. This one looks great. It's by, as I say, a South Korean, Min-suk Choi, and he's called it Archipelagic Void, which sounds very exotic, but it's effectively 5 little pavilions all clustered around one little courtyard in the middle. Excellent. Looks good.
And just finally, tell us about David Chipperfield's restoration of the Royal Academy Schools campus.
Yeah, well, this is the period of the year dedicated to degree shows, when all the students are showing off their wares in different places all around the country, all around the world. But the more interesting one, I think, is going to be to see the Royal Academy Schools campus, which has just been restored by David Chipperfield in collaboration with Julian Harrop Architects. And he's modernised all the facilities of the Royal Academy. When you go to the Royal Academy, you don't realise or don't quite appreciate that as you're going up into the galleries above, there's a postgraduate school for art underneath you. And it's just been refurbished so it can kind of work better with the rest of the building by David Chipperfield. And it's opening up for the degree show. So it's a great opportunity to get in there and see the new 150 historic casts and artworks and newly curated displays all around the building, as well as the work of the third year students.
And there are a few other notable degree shows opening around the world.
Indeed. Just to give a plug to some of them, I really like the work that the Oslo National Academy of the Arts have have shown. Obviously now these days, one of the parts and aspects of each degree show is finding a way not to just display them locally and in the museums or in the art schools themselves, but also online. So the Oslo National Academy of the Arts one looks fantastic. So if you're in Oslo, I would recommend that. But then the Canadian University in Dubai is also showing off their work as well, and that looks really worth doing it. But there's all manner of, obviously it's very last minute because these students have been working so hard just to turn their work out. So there's lots to be seen, lots of different art shows and degree shows, and I think it's really important to try and get out there and see it, because that's where the new ideas are coming from.
And if you can't get out there, of course, they're being showcased on Dezeen.
Indeed they are. They look great up there as well.
Tim Abrams, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Best known for his portraits of Stephen Hawking and the late Queen Elizabeth II, artist Tai-Shan Schierenberg has been in London to open his exhibition Mixed Emotions at Flowers Gallery. Ahead of the opening, he popped by Midori House, where he sat down with Monocle's Tom Webb to explain more about his work and the inspiration behind them.
I'm half German, and my roots in terms of style are very European. It's figurative art, but it's sort of gestural. It's very much about mark making as well as the stories being told. So I think that's got European roots. I'm hoping it's sort of classic with a twist.
And that's a classic take on portraiture and landscape art.
Yeah, it's interesting. This show that I'm just putting on, called Mixed Emotions, is about my heritage and my childhood. It's made me sort of re-examine a lot of things in my life, but also my work. So, for example, yes, I came from that classic... I had the classic portfolio of portraits and landscapes and life drawing. And actually I found, why do I paint portraits? And actually I don't paint portraits of people in the classic setting of a living room or a palace or something. I do tend to concentrate on their heads, and so I started thinking about why I paint people, and I found its roots in my very peripatetic childhood and moving around a lot, and each sort of new group of people I would meet, having to look at them very carefully. Also, they usually spoke a different language, so I'd look at their mouth very carefully, try and ascertain what they meant. And so this fascination with other people, new people, I think has led me to portraiture. So suddenly the traditional bit of portraiture is less important. It's really about my coming to terms with the strangeness of people. And similarly with landscape, so I've lived in lots of different landscapes quite profoundly. I mean that in a sense that I was very immersed in the landscape. So when I was a very young child, I lived with my Chinese grandparents in Malaysia. And then I came to London, and I lived with my parents in Muswell Hill, suburbia, and the ideas of a summer day in suburbia and the sparrows in the privet hedge and the sort of dead hand of the summer. I feel that profoundly. And then we travelled a lot. My parents were hippies, and eventually my father decided to sort of relive his childhood, and we settled in the Black Forest. And part of reliving his childhood was running a farm. So suddenly I was getting up with my brother at 5 a.m. with a scythe in hand to mow meadows for hay, and then we'd be chopping wood in the Black Forest, chopping wood for the winter fuel. So again, suddenly painting landscapes isn't a sort of gentlemanly pursuit. It's something about examining all these different geographies I've been rooted in and sort of trying to examine them. So in a funny way, classic with a twist, the twist being quite profound, actually.
Well, very profound. When you say classical, it sounds like you had a classical upbringing with ancient scythe farming techniques. And your approach to portraiture sounds almost like a narcissistic lover looking for constant new faces and ditching old ones. Is that how you...
In a funny way, when you put it like that, all artists, I think, are hungry to find something, a topic, a subject matter, a materiality with which to make art. And I suppose you're quite right, my fuel is faces, and their particularities and their differences.
And I have to ask the most basic question that you probably get asked all the time.
What makes a great face for you? What are you looking for?
That is interesting, isn't it? There is the structure, the geography of the face, of course, which is, there are some geographies that are more interesting, and you'll find a lot of portraitists actually prefer a well-lived-in face. I think the geography of a face also comes about from a lived experience, so you not only get geography, but you'll also get history in a face. I think Coco Chanel said, after the age of 40, we get the face we deserve, so that plays a role. Light, a lot of artists approach portraiture in different ways, in a linear way, in a colour way, in a tonal way. I find light is very important for me, and I like the way light plays on the geography of face. So that is important, the actual, how light strikes surfaces. I'm also a colourist in a sense. That's where I studied under Ewan Nuglo at the Slade, and he opened my eyes up to looking for colour. So colour is important as well. But then also just general feeling. But then, that would suggest that I don't like painting people I don't like, and that isn't necessarily true. I suppose also in a sort of Jungian sense of extrovert or introvert, I as an introvert am attracted to introversion and by extension melancholia. So certain faces and attitudes which are sort of internal really I find attractive.
Well, I wouldn't want to paint someone I didn't like. You have to spend a lot of time in their company, I can imagine.
That can be fascinating. I've had to paint industrialists who are absolutely awful. But it is, one can get so hidden away in one's own little milieu or in one's little studio. To encounter somebody monstrous and hugely successful is fascinating. It's important, I think, as well.
And let's talk about Mixed Emotions, your latest exhibit, which is now open. And we've spoken a bit about the inspiration behind some of it, your heritage. What has inspired the landscape pieces? What have you seen out in the real world that you have put onto canvas?
Well, this new exhibition, Mixed Emotions, came about for various reasons. I'm now 62. Both my parents have died. My mother, Malaysian Chinese, my father, German. They met here in England, in London, and I was born here. As I explained, I've travelled a lot, but I see myself as a Londoner. And I've had a few encounters recently where I've suddenly realised that I'm brown. And it might seem strange to people who know me, because I am obviously half Chinese, but I have been brought up in a culturally white environment. My father was a painter and a poet, and I was exposed to a lot of Western European culture, and those are my things I go to and I love, and I like immersing myself into, theatre, poetry, literature, art. And these few encounters I had, suddenly I realised, both your parents have died. You need to look at this side of yourself, the brown side of yourself. So I've been investigating and thinking about my life, and the landscapes come out of my very deep connection to my Chinese grandparents when I was very young, and the landscape of Malaysia.
The absolutely delicious voice of the artist Tai Shan Schierenberg speaking to Monocle's Tom Webb about his exhibition Mixed Emotions at Flowers Gallery. It's open from now until the 22nd of June. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers Tom Webb and Vincent McAviney, our researcher George Ruskin, and our studio manager Christy O'Grady. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. The briefing is live at midday. We'll be looking at the Indian election results, which are just coming out, at British politics ahead of the first television debate, and we'll have some space news too. If you want a podcast to listen to, download the latest episode of Meet the Writers, where I speak to Kalyan Bradley, who's written what I predict to be the book of the summer. The Globalist will return at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.